about 6 weeks ago, the world's largest fast food company, also better known as McDonald's, made a really extraordinary announcement that it was going to start sourcing sustainable beef in 2016 with the goal of sourcing 100% sustainable beef eventually. And the story behind that is just fascinating. I had the great good fortune of being in on that story and helping to tell it when it broke on January 7th. And to the process of telling that story, to really understand the complexities of I think, one of the world's most complex supply chains, certainly in the food area, but also what it takes to move an industry. To me, it's just an extraordinary case study of how do we move this along? How do we get further faster? And so we're going to talk about that this morning, starting down at the far end with Suzanne Apple, who's a Senior Vice President for Business and Industry at WWF. Next to Suzanne is Cameron Brewitt, who is the head of corporate, I can't remember what that word is.
Affairs,
says communications. At JBS USA, which is the the U.S. division of JBS, the world's, I believe, world's largest meat supplier. And Francesca DiBiase, who is the head of supply chain, vice president of supply chain at McDonald's. So, Francesca, let's just start with you to get the basics out. What exactly did McDonald's commit to?
Thanks, Joel. So our commitment last month, as you said, was to purchase sustainable verified beef in 2016. And you actually were the first one to report it and broke the story, and it's on greenbiz.com. Really appreciate you doing that because, as you said, it is a really complex issue, and you wrote a really great three-part article which really helps to explain it to the public and consumers in general. So
let's get specific, and I think there are a couple parts of it that were confusing to people, and if you looked at it, it did get a fair amount of media pickup from the mainstream media, and they picked up on two things. One was that you don't know, you're not saying how much sustainable beef you're going to buy in 2016, and oh, by the way, we don't have a definition yet of sustainable beef.
Right.
And so, to answer those questions, first of all, how do you get to, what are you going to do in 2016, and what is that going to be?
So what we've committed to is our first purchases of sustainable beef, and as you said, there's not a definition today. That's why we felt it was so important to be a part of the global roundtable for sustainable beef, as I'm sure we'll hear more about later, because that organization is really focused on setting criteria and principles and guidelines for what sustainable beef means, and that will be done this year. So based on that, we want to be really the first to purchase sustainable beef from the GRSB in 2016. And then in 2016, our goal is to set a further goal for 2020 and how much beef we'll buy at that point. But really, the sustainable beef commitment is part of a larger aspiration that McDonald's supply chain has, which is to purchase all of our food and packaging sustainably. And so some people ask the question, well, why beef? And really, beef for us, there's three critical reasons why we selected beef. First of all, it's really core to our business. We're a hamburger business. Right. We have 5 burgers, which are billion-dollar brands. Beef is our largest spend from a sourcing perspective. Second, our customers are telling us that they care about it. They're saying, we like beef, we'd like to eat more beef, but we want to feel good about the food we eat. And when they say feel good about the food, that's evolved. And we used to be able to say, the food is safe. We used to be able to talk about the ingredients. It's 100% beef. And now customers are asking a lot more questions.
How the animals are treated?
Yeah, how are the animals treated? What impact are you having on the environment? And they're telling us if we can answer those questions, they're going to come to us more often. So we see it as a big opportunity to sell more beef. And finally, it's our biggest part of our environmental footprint. So about 30% of our entire environmental footprint as a company is coming from beef, and that includes the restaurants. And, and we use the risk assessment tool from WWF, which is a great tool, which really just solidified the fact that beef is the #1 issue we have. So when it's core to your business, when your customers are telling you it's important, when NGOs are telling you it's important, it just seemed pretty obvious that that's where we should be focusing.
And by the way, #4, beef has been identified at McDonald's as one of 4 growth areas, along with
Absolutely.
breakfast, beverages, I think, and was it produce?
Chicken.
Oh, chicken, okay.
Yeah.
So what drove this? And why did you want to get, in effect, so far ahead of your skis by saying, we want to do this? And I mean, we've seen, Walmart do this, Procter & Gamble and Unilever and a number of other companies make some big aspirational commitments about we want to be 100% renewably powered or zero waste or something else, and we can't say necessarily when we're going to even get there. Mm-hmm. Why would McDonald's, which is already under the glare of so many activists and consumers and across so many issues, want to put itself under the spotlight like that? What drove that decision?
Well, first of all, as I said, what we do is based on customers, and customers are asking for this.
They're asking for sustainable beef specifically?
They're asking to feel better about what they eat, and we believe that translates, based on what they're telling us, a big part of is in the sustainability arena. But I think the other thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to make a commitment and communicate that to our suppliers, to the entire beef supply chain, that this is our intention, and we are all going to work together to make it happen and collaborate. I think the biggest surprise that came to us when we did make the announcement were so many people felt that we were going to either mandate or dictate what sustainable beef means. And that's not what we're about. We wanted to put this announcement out to say, now we've got a couple of years to work together with the entire industry, with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, to come up with this definition that's going to be a holistic definition that's going to focus on sustainability as we talk about the 3 E's. And very important to our supply chain is the economic piece.
Right.
So how can we ensure that farmers and ranchers are economically viable? So giving us all the time to do it the right way, I think was also a big, important reason for making the announcement now.
Right. And you only buy between 1% and 2% of all the beef in whatever country you operate in, so it's kind of, you can't necessarily dictate things. But let's go over to Suzanne, WWF. You're the key partner in all of this with McDonald's. Talk a little bit about what your involvement was, what you actually did to help move this along.
So we've been working with McDonald's, Joel, for several years, particularly when they first announced their land use policy. And as Francesca mentioned, one of the things we came in, and we have a risk assessment tool that we've developed to look at all the commodities and sourcing that a company does. So where are the big spends, where are the big impacts, where are the high risk areas? And it quickly emerged that obviously beef was a priority for them, and beef was a key priority for us in one of our top 15 commodities because of the impact on land use and the environmental impacts of livestock production. So we had begun to organize with others around the Global Beef Roundtable on sustainable beef, and McDonald's came to the table early. And so for us, it was about having somebody visible like McDonald's to take a leadership role, step up and say, we care about this, we want to commit to be involved in helping develop these principles. It's a roundtable concept that we've been part of, which you're familiar with, that launched the FSC and the MSC and others. So it's a way for us to bring the producers, the NGOs, and the big purchasers together to develop standards. JBS was quickly at the table as well.
And is this a typical engagement in that you try to work with a brand leader? Did you do that with soy and salmon and other things, and take that company and to create a standard, to create a movement? Is that typical?
It is. As you may know a little bit about us, it's all about shifting markets for us. So we think you do that by involving the leaders, the companies that have the biggest impact, someone like JBS, like McDonald's, like Cargill, and others that were early founding members of the GRSB. That's what creates the momentum to start down this road.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, the more I learn about WWF, is that you've got some, I don't know, hundreds of scientists that you deploy in these things and can do some of that real spade work here. And one of the things that was interesting to McDonald's is that they didn't realize that the biggest part of their footprint was what the cows were eating.
Right.
And what were some of the other surprises in that?
Well, it's interesting. I think some of that was, you think about McDonald's with thousands of stores around the world, and you think about their GHG emissions as a result of electricity and all that, and you immediately think, well, it must be in their stores. Well, I think it's something like 70% of your GHG impact is in your supply chain.
That's right.
So once that realization, we both realized that, and there was an opportunity to take a leadership on something as big as beef, it was a really important way to start on the supply chain. But this wasn't McDonald's first foray. I mean, they've had 100% MSC certified fish for years. They don't really talk about it, but they were one of the early adopters of MSC. So there's a lot of precedent within the company for this, and I think having someone like Francesca, who leads the global supply chain work, taking leadership within McDonald's and others, means it'll happen.
Yeah. So, Cameron, you actually wear two hats in this. One is the head of corporate responsibility for this very large company called JBS. I want to hear a little bit about that. But the other is as the executive director,
the president
of something called the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. First of all, tell us about JBS, because it's one of those companies that looms large in supply chains, but most of us hadn't heard of before.
Yeah, so JBS is a small mom and pop company based out of Brazil. We started in the early 1950s.
It really was mom and pop in the 1950s.
Oh, well, it still is, yeah. The family remains heavily engaged in the company. Certainly we have grown since that time to become the largest in the world. But
Still mom and pop.
But still mom and pop, still hold to those family values. So we're involved in beef, pork, poultry, and lamb, slaughtering about 90,000 head of cattle per day, which is why we're heavily involved in the Global Roundtable for Sustainable
And what's your
Beef.
relationship with McDonald's? Are you the largest anything, or what?
No, we would be one of their suppliers. So the way the beef industry works, we would provide what we call lean trimmings to further processors or grinders who would be direct business partners with McDonald's. So a lot of our supply would wind up in McDonald's products.
So in November 2011, 10, about 350 or so people from across the beef industry from around the world, and including NGOs, came together in Denver to have this conversation. McDonald's was one of the conveners, Walmart, Cargill, and others. And out of that came this global roundtable. Tell us about that.
So originally, JBS, Cargill, Elanco, McDonald's, and WWF really identified this sustainability issue when it comes to the beef industry as a priority for all of our respective businesses. And the major challenge was there was this myriad of issues that everyone would throw at sustainability, but there was no real clear-cut definition on what are we trying to address, what are the challenges, how do we go about really making some transformational change on the ground. So we decided, let's convene a global conference. Let's get everybody in the room. Let's discuss the issues from an Australian perspective, a Canadian perspective, a Brazilian perspective, a U.S. one as well. And we had just an incredible amount of global interest. So we had about 350 people show up, pay exorbitant registration fees.
Kind of like here, right?
Yep. And participate in several work groups and breakout sessions and to discuss the challenges. So the thing that we came away with in November was, man, there's a lot of issues, but we're not all talking on the same, kind of singing on the same song sheet here. So how do we align everyone to discuss the same issues, confront the same challenges, and really create some productive change in our industry? And so from that grew the formalization of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef.
One of the amazing things I learned about beef is that how, first of all, that a typical McDonald's patty could have meat from 3 or 4 or some multiple numbers of cows that come from different farms and in different continents, because it's the way that the ground beef comes through the supply chain, and that the way beef is raised in each of those places, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Australia, in Ireland, let alone between Montana and Georgia in the U.S., is very, very different. And so how do you create a standard that all of those different players can hew to?
Yeah, so that's the unique challenge. So if you look at many of the other commodity roundtables, those products are grown in very similar temperate regions around the world. Beef can be grown anywhere except for maybe Antarctica. The cattle have specified their genetic profiles to manage different ecosystems. Yeah. So it's an incredible challenge. So the Global Roundtable is not about the business of creating a standard per se. Yeah. To create a global standard would simply alienate large pockets of production throughout the world. And you have to understand with beef, certainly in the United States, it's a commercial enterprise. Certainly it's that way in Australia and South America, but in parts of Africa or the Middle East and China, this is a self-subsistence issue, right? So that animal may be the draft animal for the family. It may provide the milk and the protein. It may eventually wind up as beef, but it's not necessarily a commercial enterprise. So you have to be very careful when you're constructing the definition that you're not disrupting, which can oftentimes be the only driver of economic development in some of these regions. So we're really just trying to chalk the broad boundary lines of what does sustainability mean, what are the principles and criteria that you should address in your region or locality specific to the constraints that you're facing. And if you are addressing those issues in a responsible manner, then you are on the path towards sustainability, because sustainability is only about continuous improvement. It's not an endpoint. You don't wake up one day and you're sustainable when yesterday you were not. It's not as if there are sustainable systems and then completely unsustainable systems in beef. Everyone can improve, everyone can contribute to meeting the growing global demand and improving our environmental impact.
So there's a standard that's being developed right now. Where are we on that?
There's a definition that's being established. So again, it's not a standard. So the definition will run through the course of this year. We'll release it later this year to our General Assembly for vote. It will be released in March of this year for global public comment, so everyone can sling arrows and mud at us for what we've come up with. And then we'll incorporate those meaningful comments and then release a final definition for the vote of our General Assembly later this year.
Francesca, what's the reaction been so far since this became public from your supply chain primarily?
So it's been very positive. It's not that our suppliers didn't know that we've been working on this, because as Cameron said, this process has been going on for the past 2-3 years. And that's just kind of the way we work with suppliers. We're very transparent. We talk with them about what we're planning. We get them involved in it. So I think there was a lot of excitement around this from our suppliers. You know, I had the opportunity to meet with all of our global suppliers, and said to them, we all have a great opportunity here to change the world. We really do. And who wants to be the first supplier, the first rancher, the first abattoir, who's the first purchases from the global roundtable? Who wants to be there arm in arm with us and celebrating that? And there was a lot of excitement around the room. I think what we found is that we all have the same goals. We're all trying to do the same thing. We all want beef to be part of people's diets. We want the beef supply chain to be one that's economically viable for years to come. And that's, we're all in it together. And I think there's that feeling of being in it together, being part of a family that's working towards this goal.
Yeah, Cameron, one of the challenges in a lot of this, and whether it's the beef, the protein part of the animal, or leather, is the traceability, because you've got some of these, as you said, some of these farms have 1 or 2 or 5 or 20 cows, and some of them have hundreds or thousands, and they're all feeding into these abattoirs, slaughterhouses that go into packers and find their way along the route and ultimately to a McDonald's distribution center. How is the traceability? How do you trace, particularly in the Amazon, which is a big challenge where you guys, your company's headquartered, how well do you think that is being done, and what are the challenges there?
So it depends upon the region of the world where you're in. So generally an animal identification system is most effective when the government is involved and there's some sort of mandate.
Where is that?
Canada, Australia, areas such as that. If you look in Brazil, we have a lot of satellite tracking and monitoring to make sure that you're not promoting deforestation, or you're not promoting the encroachment on indigenous territories, things of that nature. But it's more of a commercial system. Some states will have a government mandated system. In the United States, we don't have that. And that's primarily been because of producer apathy or pushback towards that issue. It's more of a property right.
So let's talk about the Amazon particularly, because we're really short on time. How well is it being done down there?
It depends upon the company. So I think my company's doing a fantastic job, frankly.
I'm sure it is.
We utilize Brazil's version of NASA to track each and every supplier that provides cattle to our operation. So in Brazil, it's very different. In the United States, we have a feedlotting sector where most of the animals aggregate at one point in time, and so you can pinpoint where they're coming from, that final destination. In Brazil, you're getting cattle from disparate ranches all across the country, so it's an incredible challenge.
So cattle raising truly is rocket science. We're running out of time, but let's see if we can take a question from Elaine quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions related to protein. So given the inherent long-term unsustainability of animal protein in terms of energy, water, land use, pollution, et cetera, are these groups looking at a long-term alternative for protein?
And it gets to a question that I hear a lot is that sustainable beef really is an oxymoron, that you never can really have sustainable beef. Should we be moving to, as there so many food technology companies are now playing with this, how do we create plant-based alternatives? Where does McDonald's sit in all that?
So I think, this question was one that Suzanne answered in your article. And I think, what we see from our consumers, especially in the developing countries where we're growing our business quite significantly, is as incomes rise, people's diets change and become more protein-based diets. So what we're trying to do is to meet the needs of our customers, but at the same time doing it in a responsible way.
Yeah, I guess the question, what I hear in the question is there a role, maybe even a responsibility for a company like McDonald's, not necessarily, but a company like McDonald's, to not just say, you want beef, we'll give you beef, but it's you want protein, we will help you find protein. Some of that may be beef, some of that may be other things. Is that at all part of the conversation in the industry?
I think if you've seen the way that our menus evolved over time, I think you'll see we try to stay kind of in step or slightly one step ahead of our consumer, but we can't get too far ahead of our consumer because then they're not going to come to us anymore, and that's not a sustainable business for us. Right. But if you look today at our menu and the things we've added just over the last 3-4 years with yogurts and salads, and now chicken is almost the same sales volume as beef globally. If you look at the apple dippers and all the fruits and vegetables we've added over time, it is trying to stay slightly a step ahead of the consumer, but not too far ahead. Yeah.
We are under the tyranny of time, and I want to ask Suzanne and Cameron a final question here, which is that when we come back here for a Green Biz Forum 2016, 2 years from now, what do you want to see from McDonald's that will help ensure, that will make you understand and believe that they truly are on the right path, that they're truly walking their talk? Suzanne?
I want to see them buying beef to the standards that are developed for the region in which they're purchasing from. So being the first to market to buy the beef that comes out of this process that Cameron described, because that will send a strong signal to the marketplace that it makes sense for companies to jump in and adopt these standards and use the power of the purchase order to shift the market.
And I know that McDonald's hasn't set a quantity, a target goal, but just to put, pardon the expression, a stake in the ground, what would you like to see in terms of 2%, 5%, 10%? Or what?
How about I just say I'd like to see them buy the first ones on the market instead, because I think it's, the criteria, the roundtable process and the standards process is cumbersome, so it's a little bit hard to quantify it. But if they can help be the first ones to market and set the example, I'd be happy with that.
All right, question successfully dodged. Cameron? What do you want to see?
Well, 10 years from now, I'd like to see fewer questions like the one that we had posed.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about 2 years?
I'd like to see it this year, frankly.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the challenges communicating all the good things that we're doing in the beef industry to minimize our footprint. If you just look at the U.S. cattle herd, it's the smallest since 1950. Right. It's almost been halved, yet our total beef production has not been impacted. That's technology, that's innovation, that's doing more with less, right. That's sustainability. For McDonald's as a private company, I want them to do whatever God wills them to do, and I want them to be successful doing it. But I want them to play a prominent role in influencing our industry and help telling the story of American farmers and ranchers, Australian farmers and ranchers, all the good things that we're doing, and really promote the good things in our industry, and then discounting those practices that we don't believe lend to a more sustainable future for our business, for our industry, for our farmers.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard an accountability answer and all that, but I'll give you a pass on this because we're out of time. We are so not out of topics on all of this. This is a fascinating story, very meaty as it were, but we've got a lot to, we'll be watching this and keeping up with all three of your organizations, as well as some of the critics out there. Yeah. who are really bringing, I think, a healthy skepticism to all of this. So for now, please join me in thanking Suzanne, Cameron, and Francesca.
Thank you. you.